Hello, and welcome to your next Flip lecture. Today we'll be talking about the presidency. So, what must you be in order to be qualified to be the president? Well, as our Constitution states in Article 2, the president must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. This meaning you had to be born in the United States. However, you can be born abroad if your parents are American, say they're on a trip or if they're in the military. You must be 35 years of age to be the president, and that you must have been a resident of the U.S. for at least 14 years, but not necessarily the 14 years right before the election. The two-term president. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was the only president to win more than 2 terms. He led the U.S. through the Great Depression and World War II. He was actually elected 4 times in 1932, 36, 40, and 44. He was president for 12 years because he died in office early on in his 4th term. However, it was George Washington, our very first president, that set the precedent for the limit of 2 terms for a president. He had done his 2 terms, and he was very popular. He was the general that helped make the United States what it is today, free from England. And so after 2 terms, although he didn't have to, he stepped down. And that was kind of the precedent, the example he set for later presidents until FDR. However, in 1951, when the 22nd Amendment was passed, there were now a limit of 2 terms for a president. This was in response to FDR's very long reign. Some people thought he was becoming too powerful. All right, so what are some of the benefits of the presidency? There's a nice house, the White House. The president gets a salary of $400,000 a year, an expense account of $50,000 a year, travel expenses of $100,000, entertainment account bringing artists and singers and all kinds of musicians to the White House with a budget of $19,000 a year. He gets $191,300 per year for his retirement, so he's pretty, secure for the rest of his life. He gets his own personal airplane, that being Air Force One right here, very important plane. A place in the country, Camp David, which is a secure retreat outside of Washington, D.C. for the president. He gets free medical care. After all, we do want our president to be healthy and safe. And Secret Service protection. He has the most trained protection in the history of the world protecting him. These people take their jobs very seriously. So there's definitely some perks to being the president. Presidential succession. Say if currently President Obama is our president, say if he got maybe assassinated or just died in office from some health condition, there's obviously a succession line that allows for people to take over. Next up would definitely be the vice president, who is Joe Biden. After that is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House currently is John Boehner, a Republican, because the Republicans control the House of Representatives. After that is someone called the Senate President pro tempore. That currently is Patrick Leahy. This just changed last few weeks. And then Secretary of State is the next one up, which is Hillary Clinton currently. It'll probably be John Kerry soon, as this is being recorded in January 2013. And so then it's the remainder of the cabinet, which are all the secretaries, Secretary of Education, Defense, Agriculture, Interior, etc., in the order of their creation. So the State Department's the oldest. After that's probably Defense Secretary, the Treasury. And so we have this whole line of succession for when something happens to the president. Now obviously if the president were to get hurt and Joe Biden were to take over, Joe Biden would shortly thereafter appoint a new vice president. So it's never gotten down to the Speaker of the House. Presidential disability. The 25th Amendment creates what they call the acting president. This usually happens when presidents undergo medical procedures. For example, during George W. Bush's term, he had to go under anesthesia. He had to go, under for an operation. And for the 2 or 3 hours that happened, Dick Cheney, his vice president, was the acting president of the United States. Nothing major happened, and then once he was out of the operation, George Bush was the president again. This could be used if there was an assassination attempt. Additionally, if the cabinet and the vice president think that the president is not functioning well, maybe he's losing his sense, some kind of disease or insanity, perhaps, they could vote to remove him. That's never happened and it's unlikely. The vice president generally is an insignificant office. Legally, or constitutionally, their two jobs are to take over when the president can't be functioning, and they preside over the Senate. They are technically the president of the Senate, but really that only means that in the case of a tie, a 50-50 tie, the vice president, in this case Joe Biden, is the tie-breaking vote. The president has many roles. He wears many different hats. And so the first one is chief of state. This is how the president acts as an example for and symbol for the United States. Here you see President Obama speaking at the United Nations, representing the country to the rest of the world. Represents America at very special ceremonies. Just like kings and queens are the heads of state, so is the President of the United States to the United States of America. They award medals and usually deliver speeches many times. The next role that they play is chief executive. As you might recall, the executive branch is in charge of enforcing the law. However, the president needs millions of people to do that. And so he's the boss of the federal government and the 15 executive departments that comprise it, that make it up. So these departments help the president carry out, enforce, or execute the law. So the president chooses the cabinet members to advise and assist him. Hillary Clinton's the Secretary of State. He appointed her to that position to lead up that department, just like he appointed Robert Gates early on to be his defense secretary. The next example is holding cabinet meetings and appointing federal officials. He is the boss of the federal government. He's the overall CEO, so to speak. The chief executive, the office of the executive branch are found in the White House and in other federal buildings in Washington, D.C. That is where our government is based, our federal government. The next one is chief diplomat. They conduct foreign policy by directing the actions of American ambassadors. They also sign treaties and trade agreements with leaders of other nations. Here you see President Obama with President of Russia, Medvedev, signing what was called SALT II. It was a agreement to lower our nuclear arms stockpile. So that's part of his role as chief diplomat. The next one is he is the commander-in-chief. This is probably the best known role that the president has. He is in charge of the U.S. Armed Forces. He decides where armed forces are to be stationed and when weapons are to be used. The Secretary of Defense is in charge of the Army, but he serves to the pleasure of the president. There's also the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and that person is the top military commander under the president. They're going to advise the president, who probably doesn't have much of a military background, historically speaking, including the current president, but ultimately the final decision goes with the president. We see this ultimately, and the biggest example you can think of is whether or not to drop a nuclear bomb. The president of the United States is the only one allowed to make that decision. There's someone who follows him around with what they call a nuclear football. It's a briefcase that is handcuffed to the person carrying it, and in there is the device from which we put in the codes that the president can order a nuclear strike. Here you see a picture of the president in the Situation Room, and this is when Osama bin Laden was being taken out in May of 2011. Chief legislator. Congress has the power to make laws, however the president can propose bills and must sign bills into law. He often calls members of Congress to lobby for his agenda. One of the biggest ways he does this is he presents his legislative agenda, what he wants to see law, to Congress in what's called the annual State of the Union address, which is right here. You see the vice president behind him and then the Speaker of the House behind him as well. This happens every year, and the president lays out what he believes the country needs in terms of legislation. So what this looks like is both houses of Congress here. You have the Democrats and Republicans from both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, listening to the president as he addresses them about some issues. He's also the political party leader. The president helps members of his party, so in this case, with President Obama, he helps get other Democrats elected. They make campaign speeches for re-election both for themselves and for other offices throughout the country. He's also the head of fundraising for the party. If you can get the president to visit your fundraising event or your state, that's probably going to get a lot of people who want to donate money to your campaign in order to see him, spend some time with him. Here you see President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden in summer 2012 giving their speeches at the National Convention for the Democrats. Next up is economic planner. The president monitors many things that go on in our economy. Unemployment, we always hear about what the unemployment rate is. We hear about is there inflation going on, which is when the dollar starts losing some of its value. It doesn't buy as much as it used to. What level of taxes? We've seen this a lot in the last few months with the fiscal cliff and debt negotiations and business of the overall country. And although the president does not control the economy, ultimately he's the one that gets credit for it. If the economy tanks under their watch, they get blamed. We saw this at the end of George W. Bush's presidency when the Great Recession set in. So they get credit for it whether or not it is their fault. Here you see President Obama briefing the press corps, the reporters that report from the White House about the economy. And here's a chart about all of the recessions since 1948, since World War II, and how long they've taken to create jobs. As we see, we're currently in a very long recession that has taken a very long amount of time to recreate the jobs that were lost. And then there's the act of electing a president. A president announces his candidacy. That can happen in a number of ways, usually at some kind of campaign event in their home state. In the spring of an election year, there's the presidential primaries. And what that is when each party holds votes in each state to say which candidate do we want to be our nominee from our party. Because every time there's a new election, there's going to be multiple people running for that spot. And these primaries decide, all right, this is going to be our person. In 2008, that was Obama. In 2012, on the Republican side, that was Mitt Romney. He beat his fellow Republicans for the nomination. In the summer is the National Convention, which is where the party officially nominates that person for the candidacy. In the fall is the fall campaign. They go door to door. They go from one campaign stop to another. It's a lot of campaigning to get the votes, to get the money in order to win election. And then finally in November, on the first Tuesday after the first Monday of the month, the vote of the people. That's when our election day is. However, as we've learned, in December is when the Electoral College, which is who technically elects the president, takes the votes based on what the overall nation decided. And then on January 20th is the inauguration. And that's when the new term begins. Here you have the announcing of candidacy, presidential primaries, national conventions, fall campaign. Here you see Obama in Madison this past election, and I want to say this is a picture of Romney in one of the northern parts of Wisconsin. Election day, electoral college vote, which happens at Congress in December, and inauguration. Here's a picture from Obama's first inauguration in 2009. It was a very big turnout. All right, so that concludes our presidential notes. Thank you and have a good day.